In the penumbra of a night in Gilead, when the sky seemed to exude promises through a mantle studded with twinkling stars, the land, in its own way, concealed ancient and unspeakable secrets. That was a region where echoes of the past conversed. With the present and among the whispers of the wind, Jephthah was born, a child whose destiny would weave a path of pain, sacrifice, and unexpected leadership. From his very first moments, Jephthah bore an indelible mark: the fact that he was the product of a union considered disgraceful by the customs of the time. He was a son of Gilead, though not of the legitimate wife. He had been conceived through a relationship with a woman, marginalized by society, a woman whose past once robbed her of the acclaim reserved for the most respected. Thus, while the other children indulged in the games of innocence, the newborn saw his existence painted in tones of mockery and contempt, a burden foreshadowed amidst the hushed whispers and severe looks of his own brothers. Within the home that was supposed to be a sanctuary, the atmosphere was permeated with corrosive resentment. The legitimate sons of Gilead, marked by convention and the pride of an unsullied lineage, regarded that boy as a stranger, an intruder who did not belong to the same order as their illustrious kin. Hostility set in with the irrefutable force of an inescapable sentence, and shortly thereafter, Jephthah was expelled from the family dwelling, as if his very existence had no value or right to occupy the land that by right also belonged to him. Devoid of the comforts of a home, the young man wandered along desolate paths, carrying only the bitter pain of rejection and the uncertainty that spread like shadows at twilight. In his quest for new meaning, Jephthah found shelter in the isolated land of Tob, a remote place where prejudices did not reach those deemed undesirable by society. There, among other outcasts and marginalized souls, an environment formed in which the raw anguish of exclusion gave way to a singular strength, the ability to transform weakness into resilience, rejection into leadership. It was in that refuge that Jephthah's spirit began to occupy a greater space. Unlike the others, whose existence was reduced to childish mischief or bitter resignation, he seemed to be endowed with a unique energy, a power that, even without grandiose words or authoritarian commands, attracted those who felt lost. Among, say, the renegades, thieves, mercenaries, and souls bearing the scars of an unjust society, Jephthah came to be seen not as an outcast, but as someone who, in an unusual way, offered hope. His imposing demeanor, marked by an inner flame forged from the wounds of contempt, catapulted him into the role of a natural leader among the misfits. While Jephthah forged his new path in Tob, in Gilead, the political and military landscape was undergoing transformation. A territory once peaceful had been struck by the voracious roar of the Ammonites, ruthless warriors who advanced with an almost supernatural force, plundering harvests and setting villages ablaze. Violence spread, and the people suffered under the weight of oppression that seemed endless. Amid this scene of despair, the elders of Gilead gathered in an attempt to find an answer to the looming crisis. Debate after debate echoed the inevitability of a leadership capable of guiding the people to salvation. The paradox of that assembly, however, was the choice of a name that emerged amidst the murmurs of those seeking hope. Jephthah, the exile, one whom they had once scorned and banished from their lives. The fame that had spread through the confines of Tob, nourished by deeds that made his story resonate, had reached the hearts of those who still believed in the chance of deliverance. No longer was he the bastard viewed as a familial blot. Jephthah was presented, albeit with a hint of irony, as the sole path to liberation against the invaders. Aware of his tumultuous past, Jephthah was sought out by emissaries sent by the men of Gilead, those who once rejected him and now clamored for his leadership. When the young warrior found himself before the representatives of the elders, the air became charged not only with tension, but also with a mixture of remorse and hope. His gaze, which bore the remnants of a childhood marred by the violence of judgment, fell upon the faces he held responsible for his solitude. His words rose in the stillness of that charged moment as he asked, with perplexity and restrained fury, "Was I not driven from my own home? Did they not call me an intruder and send me away? And now in the face of danger do you call upon me as your savior?" A silence fell, and in that pause the elders acknowledged, with humility and fear, the weight of past errors. Amid restrained tears they pleaded with Jephthah to return and lead Gilead with the authority he had always been capable of demonstrating. Their proposition was not a mere appeal to compassion, but a covenant that transformed the exiled into the supreme commander, investing him with powers and responsibilities that had been denied to him in childhood. Jephthah accepted the charge, only on clear conditions. Upon returning, he would not be an ephemeral leader for a fleeting war, but the legitimate ruler of Gilead, endowed with the authority to shape the destiny of that people. In return, the elders swore, under the awe and recognition of the Lord, to honor the terms of this commitment. Yet Jephthah's heart knew that this new mission was not merely a transition of power. It was a reunion with a past that haunted him, and the certainty that the battle was fought both on the field of war and within himself. Upon his return to Gilead, the exiled was not met with the applause a hero might expect. Curious, distrustful, and even hostile glances persisted, reminding everyone that, despite his imminent victory against the Ammonites, Jephthah still bore the mark of a history steeped in rejection and exclusion. Yet something in his bearing had changed. He carried with him the firmness of someone who had learned to survive and transform disdain into strength. And so, before the eyes of the people, the elders announced their decision. Jephthah had become the supreme commander, the spokesperson for the redemption of Gilead. Before brandishing his sword, however, Jephthah decided to walk a path of intelligence and audacity. With a strategic mind and a heart open to faith, he sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites, trying to ignite a spark of dialogue amid the darkness of war. His arguments were grounded in Israel's own history, a land which, he maintained, was not conquered by enemies, but was allotted by divine destiny. Yet the enemy sovereign categorically rejected the plea for peace, reaffirming that his earthly ambitions were driven by an unrestrained desire for power. With his message delivered unequivocally, war became inevitable. Jephthah, with a serenity that belied the inner storm, set his decision. If dialogue were to fail, he would wage battle with firm conviction that the Lord would be by his side. The night before the confrontation was marked by a solitary ritual. Isolated under the starry sky, the commander knelt, surrendering his destiny and burden to God. Amid tears and fervent prayers, he pronounced a singular vow. If the enemy falls, by my hand, the first who at dawn presents themselves at my house shall be offered as a sacrifice to the Lord. This was not a mere impulsive gesture, but a commitment laden with faith and anguish. The promise, made with all the sincerity of his heart, imbued the air with an invisible weight, a burden that Jephthah would carry forever. With the vow sealed in his soul, he gathered his comrades, men forged in marginality and united by the same desire to overcome, and marched toward the field where the Ammonites had gathered. Trusting in the strength of their numbers, the ensuing march was a symphony of steps and prayers, marked by the tension between the beating of drums and the quickened pulse of the leader's heart. Every move, every advance, seemed guided by forces beyond human understanding. Amid the tumult, the clanging of metal and the cries of war mingled with the remnants of hope placed by those who believed that this victory would seal the destiny of Israel. Thus, the fields that witnessed the battle soon transformed into a stage upon which the divine and the human waged a silent struggle. Jephthah, wielding his sword with mastery and determination, led his men with the fervor of the chosen one. The enemy army, which at first relied on its confidence of success, was taken by surprise by the force that seemed to imbue every movement of Jephthah. It was not merely a matter of numbers. It was the providential hand guiding each blow, each charge, allowing the people who had suffered for so long to finally glimpse freedom. The victory was swift and relentless. As soon as the Ammonites were defeated, the news spread through the corners of Gilead like a beam of light breaking through the darkness. Jephthah emerged not only as a military chief, but as a symbol of liberation. However, the radiance of triumph was soon dimmed by the weight of the vow that had been sealed that very night. As he rode in triumph along the roads of his homeland, the leader could not forget that at dawn, the Lord would claim what had been promised. During the journey back, anticipation hung in the air. Although the songs of victory mingled with the tentative welcome of the inhabitants, Jephthah's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for destiny to reveal the final price of his oath. And then, upon seeing the doors of his house open, his heart tightened with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. The first to approach was not a servant or a mere messenger. It was his daughter, the only surviving child, who ran toward him with pure, contagious joy. Seeing her thus, with a smile that appeared to reflect the happiness of reunion, the man who had once been scorned felt the weight of his vow transform into acute pain. Each step that his daughter took felt like a blow, a bitter reminder of the commitment made in anguish. As she threw herself into his arms, she embodied the innocence that the universe had not denied even to the forsaken, and at that moment, the glory of victory clashed with the inescapable burden of sacrifice. Amid tears he could scarcely hold back, Jephthah rose in a silence that conveyed more than words ever could. With a voice choked by sorrow, he pronounced, "My daughter, your joy which illuminates the corners of this man now becomes the source of my agony. I made a vow to the Lord, a vow I cannot, under any circumstances, retract, and the inevitable fulfillment of that promise imposes itself upon my existence." The girl, in a tone that blended innocence with an unusual maturity for her age, replied in a way that paradoxically eased the heaviness of that tragic moment. "Father, if a vow to the Lord is your commitment, so be it. However, I beg you to grant me 2 months to go to the mountains, where among my friends we can mourn the innocence that was lost to me." In the delicacy of her words lay both resignation and courage. In the days that followed, as the tradition of mourning was observed among the mountains, Jephthah's daughter experienced a period of introspection, a solemn pause to honor the destiny set in motion by the vow. Each day passed like a whispered goodbye to innocence, as hope and sorrow intertwined in the hearts of those around her. At the end of that period, she returned to her father, accepting with a serenity that cut to the very soul the inevitability of her sacrifice. Thus, the fulfillment of that oath marked one of the most painful and emblematic moments in Jephthah's history. The triumph achieved with great effort was transformed simultaneously into the sentence that would seal the leader's personal tragedy. When the people of Gilead learned of the outcome, they sank into a heavy silence, where the exaltation of victory gave way to a collective mourning. Just as the land wounded after a storm, the community moved immersed in a sorrow that was not confined to the borders of the war against external enemies, but had penetrated the very core of each inhabitant, even though peace was eventually restored. In Gilead, and the scars of war slowly began to close, Jephthah's reign was never without shadows. In the ensuing years, he governed with a firmness that reflected not only the authority gained on the battlefield, but also the personal price he had paid for every victory. For 6 years, his rule was relatively stable, with the Israelite army safeguarding the borders, while the interior of the land retained remnants of an immeasurable sorrow. And as if the spilling of blood had been the only currency for his rise, new challenges soon emerged from within the nation itself. The tribe of Ephraim, haughty and marked by wounded pride, advanced without the courtesy of prudence, demanding their share in the glory. They crossed the Jordan in significant numbers, carrying with them fury and a thirst for revenge against a leader who, years before, had rejected them without ceremony. Verbal confrontations evolved into heated disputes, and internal turbulence threatened to undermine the newly won stability. Jephthah, who had already known the pain of exclusion and the disdain of his own brothers, faced that uprising with a calm that challenged the gravity of the situation. In a tone that mixed firmness with bitterness, he responded to those who rebelled. "When calamity struck our homes, many shirked from helping. I was the one who fought in solitude. If today you come to claim a share, know that I will not bow before the memory of a past where I was denied both an ear and affection." What began as an exchange of words quickly turned into a contest of wills, with clashes that exceeded the bounds of reason. Although Jephthah emerged victorious in that internal conflict, every victory carried the additional burden of wounds that would never completely have a chance to heal. Leadership, therefore, became a constant exercise in balancing the responsibility toward the people with the scar left by a painful past. When the days of battles and disputes finally ended, the commander was left with a silent reflection on the true cost of promises made in times of despair. While his name echoed on the streets and in the hearts of those who expressed gratitude to him, Jephthah remained alone, facing the insidious mirror of his memories. His home had transformed into a space where laughter and hope had given way to the constant murmur of a past that would not be forgotten. Every decision, every act carried out in the name of duty was permeated by the inexorable reminder of an irrevocable vow. In the solidity of his journey, Jephthah ended his days with conflicting feelings. On one hand, he was celebrated as the liberator who, from the margins, arose with strength to save his people. On the other hand, the personal price he had paid, the irreparable loss of his daughter, remained as a tragic epithet that would never be erased. This paradox between military triumph and the bitter gift of personal sacrifice echoed with every tardy decision and every distant look. In the years that followed, even though the land of Israel enjoyed a moderate external peace, the leader's heart never allowed itself to rest. The calm during his rule was restless, punctuated by echoes of cries and unfulfilled promises, by the impassioned debates of the elders, and by silences that said more than words ever could. Jephthah, in his steadfast leadership, became a symbol that exile and rejection can, even under the weight of wounds, forge a magnificent destiny, albeit one marked by irreparable emotional scars. As generations passed, Jephthah's story became something recounted in whispers and reverence. It was not merely a narrative of war and victory, but a profound lesson about the risks of rash vows and the burden of divine calling. His journey, woven with threads of "make it so" challenges and the bitter taste of sacrifice, lived on among those who, amid their own struggles, sought a reason to persevere. His scars, both visible and invisible, stood as evidence that the ways of the Lord are not shaped to human standards, and that sometimes it is in the pain of rejection that the most surprising leaders are forged. Jephthah's legacy remained alive, not only in the memory of those who knew him, but also in the silences and choices of everyone who at some point felt excluded or undervalued. In his ministry, it was learned that love and justice can be woven even from the darkest moments, and that the price of fidelity to a vow, even if high, can reveal the true essence of devotion. Finally, the story of that man who was, above all, marked by the label of rejection, resounds as a call to each person who dares to face adversities with courage and faith. Jephthah teaches us that even when destiny seems unyielding, there is an inner strength capable of transmuting suffering into wisdom and of transforming marginality into the condition of leader and example. His final years, marked by a meditative silence, were full of quiet reflections on the immeasurable value of each vow, of every decision made in a moment of despair, and on the need to seek a balance between the desires of the heart and the demands of the divine calling. Today, as we recall Jephthah's journey, we are invited to meditate on the complex lessons his life offers us, lessons of resilience, sacrifice, and the inevitable duality that accompanies every great destiny. He was forged in adversity and became an indispensable milestone in the history of Israel, proving that even the most tortuous paths can lead to redemption. And so the legacy of that man remains, an eternal reminder that the very place where darkness coalesced to crush a spirit can be the very setting where the light of faith and leadership manifests in a surprising and transformative way. This narrative is an invitation to reflect on the cost of hasty decisions, the unusual power of faith, and the complex intersection between individual destiny and divine design. May Jephthah's journey inspire those who, even in the darkest moments, find within themselves the strength to rise, to transform disdain into courage, and to embrace, even at the cost of an irreparable sacrifice, the responsibility to lead. May every word spoken here echo within our hearts, reminding us that many times the greatest lessons arise from what wounds us, and that the paths mapped by the divine do not follow the logic of men, but rather the mysterious weave of destiny that unites suffering with hope, leaving us, with every journey, the conviction that even in the face of the impossible, there is always the opportunity to rise again, to turn pain into strength, and to discover in the interstices of existence the deepest meaning of life. Every story carries an invitation to reflection. As we follow Jephthah's journey, we are reminded that life's challenges can transform into profound lessons, capable of propelling us toward a new hope. If this message has awakened in you the desire to seek wisdom in adversities and to value every learning experience, join this community. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share the video. Your participation helps spread this light of inspiration, connecting hearts and minds on a journey of discoveries and overcoming.